The Kyle Anzalone Show. I am very excited today to have a new guest for you. I always had the regulars in rotation, but gotta bring somebody new in every now and then, especially when they're writing great stuff at the Libertarian Institute. So always happy to bring one of my coworkers at the Institute on the show to talk about the great work that we're doing over there. This is Matt Wolfson. He's an investigative journalist whose work has appeared in the American Conservative, the Epic Times, Restoration of American News, and many others. Follow him on Twitter at underscore Oppo Research, and that is his website, oppo-research.com. Matt, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Kyle, thanks so much. It's Oppo _ research. That's the handle. Thanks for your patience. I had to change the handle, or I changed the handle recently. I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
As a writer, writing for the Libertarian Institute and Scott, and having colleagues like you it's a dream.
Well, thank you so much for that. Got quite a bit I'm hoping that we could get through today. New York City and Israel, a surveillance colony, and Zionism took over MAGA. So, Matt, one of the things that really surprised me is I've never cared about a New York City mayoral race in my life. It's usually two left wingers. One's a centrist Democrat, one's maybe a little bit progressive, maybe even a little bit further than that. And I don't care what happens in New York City. I try to stay out of the place as much as possible.
That's a great rule.
But this year, Israel somehow became a central part of the debate around the mayoral race. And so you have this article, How Zionist Influence in New York Gave Rise to Zohran Mamdani. Kind of explain what you mean here.
Well, maybe just a little bit about me to set the stage. I made what in retrospect was the massive mistake of not doing what you did, and I lived in New York for 8 years. And for 7 of those years, I was working with. At the time, I'm Jewish. I was a Zionist at the time. Not deeply into it, but it was the right thing to do. And I worked for these networks. Specifically, I mentioned this to Scott just to give the audience a little bit of a sense of where I'm coming from. I spent 7 years collaborating with Martin Peretz, who ran the Zionist magazine, The New Republic, from 1974 to 2012, and really brought Zionism to Washington in a kind of mainstream centrist, appeal to the uniparty, respectable way. And I worked in these networks. By the end, I was very disillusioned. Martin Peretz's memoir, which is what I was collaborating with him on, came out, and it's called The Controversialist. I would urge everyone to read it because it's one review, a critical review, said it's a great book. It's the best book by an unreliable narrator since Lolita. In other words, it gives you a lot of sense of all of the fuck ups, but it does it in a nice way, in a way that makes the protagonist look, okay. And the sort of narrative part of it was his, and the research that sort of gave you how all of their policies failed was mine. And that came out in 2023. I was long gone by then. For the last couple of years, I've been moving away from Zionism. And in retrospect, a lot of the things I wrote look very different to me. And one of the things I worked on for that book was a chapter called New York, Capital. And it was about the Zionist influence in New York in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and how these people sort of rose to power. Now, at the time, I was sort of seeing it through rose-colored glasses. Well, they put these policies in place. It didn't work. They were good guys, though. My view of their motivations and intent has changed enormously. And so when I reread that chapter, I'm thinking, oh my God, this was an imperial takeover I was writing about, and I didn't even know it. And if you've lived in New York, if you've spent time there, and if you spent time with those circles, it becomes very clear that since at least the 80s, New York, and this is why New York is important if you don't live there, it is the testing ground because there's so much financial wealth there, government subsidized financial wealth. It is, and so much philanthropy, which is what financiers do to give themselves power. It is the testing ground for a lot of the terrible stuff that's come to the rest of the country. And so When I wrote this piece about how Zionist influence in New York gave rise to Zohran Mamdani, in many ways it's a kind of microcosm of what we've seen in the country, which is from like in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the uniparty throughout the country did this thing they called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism was meant to be small government, but it wasn't small government. It was taking money away from welfare and redirecting it to corporations. And New York was the ground zero. Sorry for that. New York, inapt pun. New York was the testing ground for this. And many of the people who tested it there, I mean, one person I write about in the piece, Michael Steinhardt, who was one of the first hedge fund billionaires, was a Jewish Zionist. They then used what they did in New York in the 1980s, which was basically subsidizing corporations using government money, subsidizing government, but they weren't really small government. That was the play. And then pushing forward this very draconian war on crime and real estate development backed by government that really hurt middle and working class traditional communities in the city. They pushed this, and then they took it national. Steinhardt was the main backer of the Democratic Leadership Council, which was the main backer of Bill Clinton in 1992. The New Republic, which Steinhardt later co-owned, that Martin Peretz, who I worked with, owned for those many years, was Clinton's first big backer in Washington, D.C. during the election season. Basically, they took what they thought worked in New York, which was this pro-finance, pro-war on crime, pro-militarization of police, pro-big real estate developer using government. I mean, it was a boondoggle. They took it to D.C., and that was Clinton, and that was Bush, and that was Obama. And so that, in a nutshell, is why New York is important. New York is the seeding ground of a lot of this, and it's also the seeding ground of the reaction. Occupy Wall Street, Bernie Sanders, AOC, these are all reactions, in my view, to, if you, I know a lot of people on the left, if you read what they're saying, look, like, all this money is going by stealth to corporations. Why the F shouldn't it be going to people like me? That's their basic argument. They're saying all these fat cats are making off with the loot, which they are, and they're saying, let's redirect it to the people. And that's, if you look at it, what Bernie's argument has been, what Occupy has been, what Our Revolution has been, what AOC has been, and now it's what Mamdani is doing. But what makes it so dramatic is he's doing it in New York, which is the capital of Zionist finance and politics in America. And so if you look at it from the Zionist point of view, which I really hate to do, but like it's useful and I once did, so I use it now from the opposite lens. If you look at the Zionists, they're just freaking out. They're like, this is our home turf. What do we do? The threat is here, and it's happening in New York, excuse me, for some of the same reasons, which is to say, middle class incomes have been going down, working class have been going down, they've been stagnating, people are finding it harder to afford, daily life, inflation is up. And in many ways, it's worse in New York because it's the most unequal city. It has the biggest consumer economy, and all of these effects we're seeing across the country is worse in New York. So you're finally getting this massive blowback where Zohran runs his campaign and he says, look, I'm going to take after Zionism directly and I'm going to take after big finance. And I disagree with some of his analysis and some of his solutions. But
Right.
his basic diagnosis is dead fucking right.
So, yeah, I think you make a great point where, a lot of libertarians right now are kind of asking themselves, like, how is it that this country has moved so far socialist? And from my perspective, it's not necessarily that the socialists are doing anything to win the argument. However, the argument is being lost by the American centrists in the name of capitalism, and so that's driving people to communism. And so it's just the failure of those policies is kind of creating that backlash reaction that's ushered in this guy, who has also picked up, because that umbrella of the neo-capitalism we have in the United States. Zionism is a big part of that power structure through the neoconservatives and things like that. So, spot on analysis there. Now, next up, I did want to ask you about this article because this is really crazy, and I think kind of ties in well to the previous article we went over. New York Police Department Commissioner Jessica Tisch is turning New York City into a surveillance colony. So, what the hell is going on here?
Well, so one of the first articles I wrote for the Libertarian Institute, and Scott reposted it, and it was a real privilege because I was so upset about it. That's why I wrote it, was about the raise and rebuild plan for Gaza. And that's kind of my model for when I write about what Zionists do to certain spaces. And that's why I use the word surveillance colony, because if you look at the raise and rebuild plan for Gaza, it has a lot to do with this isn't real capitalism, right? Like what you described, the centrists losing the argument. I would argue they're not even making the argument. They're putting capitalism as this fig leaf for government backed. I mean, it's essentially the academic concept for this is military Keynesianism. So it's driving up deficits in the name of giving money to corporations in the military corporate state. And I mean, Keynes is obviously Keynes, he was a Democrat, right? So like this is just reenacting World War II, the Cold War, that kind of expenditure on a bigger scale. And they're doing this in Gaza, where they're basically saying, we're going to get, a bunch of corporate donors, or corporate operators, Jared Kushner's affinity partners, people associated with Saudi Arabia, and we're going to remake Gaza into this city of high rises, into this city of surveillance where we use, Israel's technology to surveil the people. We're going to kick out the Palestinians. They're going to go somewhere, and basically we're going to make it, quote unquote, Gaza on the Riviera. Now, a lot of the models for this project come from Saudi Arabia, from cities the Saudis have built for the last 15 years. Those cities, many of the operators behind those cities are literally the people, I'm not joking here. One name I'll throw out is Dan Doctoroff, who's a Jewish Zionist and the deputy mayor of New York under Michael Bloomberg. They're literally the policies, the Zionists pushing those policies in Saudi Arabia that are being used in Gaza. They were the ones who remade New York, who basically poured a bunch of money into corporations and said, look, we're going to make this friendly to finance and tourism. We're going to drive a war on crime. We're going to militarize the police. $1 billion for the police in 1993, $3 billion in 2000. And of course, that was federal money, but to get the federal money, New York had to spend a matching amount. So you're raising taxes and raising the deficit on New Yorkers as well, local government is. They're basically doing a version, or rather Gaza is a version of this raise and replace colonialism, which is we're going to kick out Black, Latinos, the middle and working class of the city. We're going to kick them out to the outer boroughs. We're going to kick out middle class whites. We're going to build a bunch of gleaming towers. And we're going to use surveillance and policing as our way of keeping control. And that's where Jessica Tisch comes in, because Jessica Tisch has been the New York City police commissioner since the end of 2024. She is the third generation of the Tisch family. Now, the Tisch family is not one that you've necessarily heard of. They're sort of interesting players because, a Jewish Zionist like Larry Ellison, we all know who he is because he's giving money to the IDF. He's doing tech out in Silicon Valley. I mean, his son David Ellison has taken over Paramount and CBS. We know who he is. The Adelsons, of course, Paul Singer. The Tisches do it differently. The Tisches come originally from money made in hotels, and then they transitioned to actually buy CBS and the New York Giants in the 1980s. Jessica Tisch is now the police commissioner. Her grandfather did that. Jessica Tisch is a scion of this family. I mean, altogether, I think there were two original brothers. Then there are four kids on one side. She's the kid of one of those kids. And she's, I think, 44 years old. And most of the Tisches have made their money with finance and philanthropy. Jessica Tisch took a different route. She went directly into public administration. And what she did is in 2008, graduates with 3 degrees from Harvard, job offers from, of course, the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, the big Zio media complex places. Instead, asks for an interview with Ray Kelly. Ray Kelly is then the New York police commissioner under Michael Bloomberg, and he's the one responsible for, as Bloomberg rezones and Doctoroff rezones the city, raises rents, drives out the working and middle class, people of color, white people. Kelly was responsible for driving up policing, keep the city safe for tourists, patrol black and brown people. I mean, which is really what it is. Don't solve any of the neighborhood's problems or even try to, just patrol the shit out of them. Kelly worked for Bloomberg and Doctorow, both powerful Jewish Zionists. Tisch is the third generation of one of the top 10 most powerful Jewish Zionist family in the city, who started remaking it in the 80s through finance and philanthropy. Tisch asks for an interview with Kelly in 2008. She says, I want to work at the NYPD. Kelly, this is a man who employs 55,000 people. Kelly gives her the interview, an entry-level recruit. He says later, probably it's because she was a Tisch. Well, yeah. After this interview, and by the way, when he does this, her father or uncle, I'm going to forget, it's in the piece, was leading the New York, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's also in the piece. The main charitable foundation for the NYPD was being led by her relative, her father, her uncle. Now, two of her brothers are on the board. So the place the NYPD relies on for private money was, at the same time as Jessica Tisch was being interviewed by Kelly, this new recruit, being run by her uncle or her dad. I mean, this is so incestuous in a certain way. It's nuts.
So the plan is to essentially implement what they wanted to do in Gaza in New York City.
I'd put it a little differently. I'd say, and this goes back to New York being the testing ground, they did it first in New York, and it started in 2008. Kelly, when he interviews Tisch, says, hey, I'm going to give you something new to do. We have this new surveillance system that was being funded by the federal government, with government help, with government technology, with Microsoft technology to fight the war on terror. I want you to develop this system. Tisch does it. She spends the next 12 years spearheading this development. The person she was working with, her main partner in crime, who is now her deputy police commissioner, is a woman named Rebecca Ulam Weiner. She is the granddaughter of one of the scientists who work on the Manhattan Project. And her big takeaway, I'm paraphrasing, but this is a quote she gave, is they were so good at keeping the Manhattan Project secret. I wonder if you could keep military corporate actions secret today. So these are basically deep state spooks. They used to be WASPs, now they're Jewish Zionists, and they're very powerful. And from 2008 until now, they have been in charge of spearheading the development of this system. Tisch left the department to become sanitation commissioner for a couple years during Adams's early mayoralty. Then she comes back, he appoints her. Right as his support is falling off, and Jewish Zionists who originally opposed him, this elite network, are saying, well, we'll back you now, because they see he's dependent. So he hires her in what I think was a quid pro quo. I cannot prove that. That just seems logical to me. He hires her. Her first move, and I quote articles saying this is public information. There are no sources here. This is in plain sight. Her first move is to expand the domain system, the surveillance system, far more than it's been before. She's trying to bring private businesses in. She's saying, if you pay for the surveillance, we will network this into our system. She's trying to, she wants to pioneer to expand a gunshot awareness program that's supposed to detect gunshots and channel that information directly to NYPD headquarters. And this program has been successful. It's in the piece. I put it in like 11 to 15% of the time. It's very ineffective. She wants to expand it anyway. So she's pushing, and her goal, and she's very open about this, she says, she wants to expand facial recognition software as well. And finally, her goal is, I want to do this to the point where if we detect even a hint of wrongdoing, not like a gun, but somebody exposing himself on the street, we can surge, quote unquote, police officers there directly within minutes. Now, we've seen this story before. This is what happened in the Rodney King riots, the LA riots of 91 or 92. Rodney King was speeding too fast. He wouldn't pull over. The police gave him chase. Within like 10 minutes, 23 police officers, a helicopter, and like 5 squad cars were there, and they were kicking him on the ground. And the only reason it became a thing is a neighbor came out in this neighborhood and started videotaping it. So we've seen what this kind of thing leads to, and we're already seeing it in New York. In the piece, I reference a person of color, a black man, who spent either a couple days or a week or longer in prison in April of this year when he was misidentified for public indecency. It was like public lewdness or something. Now, this guy was like 6'3" and 200 pounds. Again, the stats are in the piece. The actual person who did it was like 5'6" and 175 pounds. But the system said they matched, using facial recognition software, they matched his picture to the description of one witness, and they put him in jail. I mean, and she wants to expand this, and this is the type of thing they're going to do full bore in Gaza. Because in Gaza, they're not dealing with somebody who wants to moon you. They're dealing with people they call terrorists. Hamas will be the catch-all. The joke making waves the last couple months online, such and such is Hamas. The New York Times criticizes Israel. The New York Times is Hamas. To everybody, this is going to be Hamas. Everything's going to be Hamas over there.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I would be very concerned if I lived in New York City. Now, I want to wrap up the show talking to you today about, Zionism and the MAGA
Can I say
movement.
one thing, which is this is going to spread. San Antonio, where a progressive Democrat just got elected, she calls herself progressive. They're doing something like this too. This is going to go. The problem with New York is it never stays in New York. Like if it just stayed in New York, okay, live in your miserable surveillance colony. It's not going to stay, right? It's going to go to small cities. It's going to go because there's a lot of money to be made. Microsoft is invested. There's a lot of financial players. This is going to spread. I hate to say this. I choke saying this. New York's problem is going to become America's problem. That's why this matters.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an absolutely fantastic point to add there. Now,
Nice.
I do want to talk to you about, more the Republican side of the aisle here because, you have a recent piece of the Libertarian Institute, how how Zionists hijacked MAGA. But right now, almost in real time, we are seeing this ideological civil war happening among Republicans. This first clip I have from you is Mark Levin discussing what should happen
Don't make me.
what should happen to the Republicans who are insufficiently supportive of Israel.
We cancel stuff all the damn time. Hitler admirers, Stalin admirers, Jew haters, American haters, Churchill haters. You're damn right we're going to cancel them and deplatform them. It's called the market system. They don't have a lifetime job like a bureaucrat who we're going to protect. And if they're your friend, there's something wrong with you. No Hitler admirer, Holocaust denier, platformer should be anybody's friend, as a matter of fact. You don't get to wrap your psychotic, mental, unhinged, Nazi, Klan, jihadist bullshit around American patriotism. You don't get to claim you're MAGA and America first when you're lining up with the Marxists and the Islamists and Hamas and the terrorists. We're surrounded by cowards who have microphones, who have TV cameras, who have websites, who have columns. Cowards. It's spelled C-A-R-L-S-O-N. It's spelled F-U-E-N-T-E-S. It's spelled O-W-E-N-S. It's spelled B-A-N-N-O-N. It's spelled Marjorie Trader Green. You can figure that out yourself. And they're not alone. To Tucker Carlson, I say, did you have a head injury? What happened to you? But you know what? Unlike other people, truly, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't care why. I just know what you are. You platform these people. You deceive your audience. You lie to your audience. you become a full-blown, out-of-the-closet Jew hater. We cancel stuff all the damn time. Hitler admirers, Stalin admirers, Jew haters, American haters, Churchill haters.
So, what do you make of this growing split in the Republican Party, where on one side you do have some very concerning rhetoric coming out of the Nip Fuentes camp, and on the other side you have these same neocons that lied us into the war in Iraq using the exact same language, with a little bit different thrown in anti-Semitism to the people who dissented against the war in Iraq.
I mean, first of all, I have to say, as somebody of Jewish heritage, I'm half Jewish. I identify with the Jewish tradition. I actually find what he's saying sickening, because I mean, genuinely sickening, because it hurts Jews, and the way it hurts Jews is what you're talking about. What it does is it says to be a Jew hater is to be skeptical of. And by the way, Bannon, that was nuts. Bannon is not against Israel. I mean, the man, I criticize him some in the piece. He walks to find a line for me, right? But to be a Jew hater is to be the same as having skepticism or disliking Israel. And first of all, the conflation is, I mean, I won't even say it'll all be too hyperbolic. It's sickening to me. Secondly, that's why you see Nick Fuentes, right? If you tell someone, and I see this literally online with people, they'll post things like, well, I've spent the last 5 years trying to be nice about this, and you keep telling me I'm an anti-Semite because I don't like Israel. Fuck you, I'm an anti-Semite. There's something wrong with Jews. These people like Levin, and the thing about Levin is I'm nauseated by him because he's the public front, but he's the public front for financiers like those in New York, Paul Singer, Miriam Adelson, John Paulson. Those are the people who are pushing the money that allows these people, via Rupert Murdoch, who's a big Zio ally. He's not Jewish, but I mean, pushing the money that allows these people to say these things and think that they can enforce this. Bill Ackman. And these people, these Jewish Zionists, they have penthouses, they have security. I lived in that world. They're masters of the universe, as Tom Wolfe said a long time ago about Wall Streeters. They don't have to worry about the anger that they're stirring up in the name of protecting Israel against American Jews. You know who has to worry about that? Jews on the street. And the betrayal of the community is evil and nauseating. The only other thing I'd say is the way that they're getting this done, I say this in the piece, is big financiers are pouring money, and then individual Zionists are infiltrating MAGA. Like, if anybody's interested, look up Sigal Chattah, who let the Nevada district attorney, who circumstantial evidence suggests let a Jewish suspected pedophile go back to Israel. I mean, he was a Jewish Israeli. She was on Bannon's show a million fucking times in 2024. Not a million, but I saw her regularly. I was watching regularly at that time. They get in these positions, these Jewish Zionists, and somebody like Bannon, I would imagine, feels a bit of loyalty to her, so they don't criticize. They temper their criticism. And so, they have people in the movement, people like Ben Shapiro, who's going was close to Charlie Kirk, purportedly, who is involved in TPUSA. They neuter criticism because it's hard to criticize people you think are your friends and your allies. And then you have the big voices like Levin. And so it's three people. It's the financiers on one hand, the faux populists who infiltrate MAGA, and then the squawk boxes like Levin. And there is a war, and it's causing anti-Semitism, and the cause of anti-Semitism is the Zionists at this point. That's not always historically been the case. I mean, you can read Henry Ford. That was before Zionism. He was an anti-Semite, but the cause of anti-Semitism now is it's the Zionists, almost in such a large degree that I don't think there's anything to say at this point until we throw off Israel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think right now, if you look at the influencers that are speculated to be the ones getting paid $7,000 a post, a lot of the content they're coming up with, I watch and I think, good God, this is ammunition for the Fuentes crowd. And One of the things I'm very concerned about right now in the United States is that our political landscape seems to be rapidly changing. Where on the left you have a rejection of the centrism, and they're moving more towards socialism, and on the right you had that same rejection of the old establishment foreign policy, and you are ending up with a split where they're making it out to be that the split is between Nick Fuentes and Mark Levin, and that they're trying to use that to discredit Tucker, when really Tucker is the reasonable right at this point. And I would love for the debate to be between Tucker and Fuentes or something like that, but my concern is what's going to happen is they're really going to isolate the debate between themselves and Fuentes is going to absolutely annihilate them. These people have nothing interesting to say. They haven't in 20 years. Everybody remembers that they're the ones who screwed up our country in the first place. They hate them for that, and they would take anybody else. It's not necessarily that Fuentes and people who are maybe further right and Nazis are going to win the argument. It's that Levin is going to lose the argument. One last clip for you here. This is Congressman Randy Fine.
If I was talking to my father at 8:59 p.m. at night, he would say, "Randy, I gotta go. Tucker Carlson's going to be on." But make no mistake, today, Tucker Carlson is the most dangerous anti-Semite in America. He has chosen to take on the mantle of leader of a modern-day Hitler Youth, to broadcast and feature those who celebrate the Nazis, those who call for the extermination of Israel, to defend Hamas, to even criticize President Trump for stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions. Friends, make no mistake, Tucker is not MAGA.
So they got this whole event. Levin and Fine were both speaking at it. It was, I think, the Republican Jewish Committee, or the Jewish Republican Committee. And they all had signs in front that said Tucker is not MAGA. So, Matt, what do you think are the prospects of, kind of Tucker being able to win the argument here, and us ending up with, MAGA America First moving in a less interventionist, less pro-Israel direction than what seems to be happening, which is these neocons are winning the argument inside the administration, and then you have like the Fuentes crowd kind of winning the argument in the culture?
My main concern is co-option by powerful Jewish Zionists and their allies of the left and the right. I mean, you see this. I saw in the comments where somebody said, "You guys are really naive. Mamdani is bought by the Zionists." Well, actually, with respect to the commenter, I appreciate the comment. No, he wasn't. But he's now agreed to keep Jessica Tisch on as commissioner in what is essentially, you can elucidate, a backdoor deal with the Zionists. Larry Ellison is a close friend of President Trump. I mean, I wouldn't put it past these guys to want to make Nick Fuentes the face of this thing so they can prosecute speech and say, we're fighting Nazism. I mean, I actually think that's their play. And while Nick Fuentes has a big following, these people have capital on their side, and they have the military corporate apparatus on their side. And Larry Ellison is worth almost $400 billion, and Paul Singer. And, that's my fear, that they're going to co-opt both sides and then make this a war against, Fuentes on the one hand and somebody else on the other, and I think that's their play. To me, simply because of the capital at play here, they are the clear and present danger. These giants, these gigantically powerful Jewish Zionists and their Christian Zionist allies, and supremacists, not Jewish at all, manipulating the public and co-opting the discourse. And I think I see them as a major, major, major threat. And I think their co-option of this discourse and their attempt, as you say, to get Tucker out and to target Fuentes and make him the poster child will in the end hurt Jews. But I think in the midterm they might win, and Jews will still be hurt because there'll be violence. But In the meantime, we've lost our freedom of speech because we're passing things in the name of combating Nazism and Nick Fuentes. So
Absolutely.
I'm very, very concerned. And I think the place to look is not Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes doesn't have any power. He's just saying things that are wrong. These guys have enormous power, and they are manipulating the country and killing people abroad and surveilling people at home. And they're the people to keep our eyes on, I think, because
Absolutely.
they're the one running this play. I mean,
Yep.
Nick Fuentes is wrong. Nick Fuentes could get kicked out at Twitter in 5 minutes if they put enough pressure on Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
Trump,
Matt,
if
we
they get
gotta
Trump to tell Musk, I'm going to cancel your Pentagon contracts, Nick Fuentes is out, right?
Yeah.
These guys are in the driver's seat. I would say keep your eye. I'm not condoning Fuentes' comments by any stretch, I don't think he's the one to keep your eye on. I think it's these people in the center operating.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. We do have to call it there. Like one of the commenters says, I love this guy, so I'll definitely have you back on the show again in the future. And everybody, make sure you keep an eye on the Libertarian Institute for a lot of Matt's great writing. Thank you.